My name is Hilda, and I'm 60 years old. What I'm about to share will fundamentally alter your perception of your own family. Merely 3 days ago, my son Damien and his wife Melissa propelled my husband Henry and me over a precipice, a fall of 90 feet. As I lay there, broken and bleeding, I heard Henry's desperate plea: "Hilda, remain still. Pretend you're deceased." Yet that was not the most harrowing aspect. The absolute worst was when Henry disclosed a truth so dreadful for any mother to comprehend. A secret our children had concealed for a quarter of a century. For 40 years, Henry and I cultivated what we believed to be an idyllic family. Each morning we awakened in our modest suburban dwelling, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the cheerful chirping of birds. I dedicated my days to teaching at the local elementary school, returning each afternoon with tales of my young pupils. Henry, meanwhile, operated his carpentry workshop, where he crafted exquisite furniture. His hands, though calloused, possessed a remarkable dexterity, capable of transforming humble wood into objets d'art. We were blessed with 2 sons, Richard, our elder, and Damien, who arrived 5 years later. Richard was the vivacious spirit of our home, perpetually cheerful, assisting his father in the workshop and always shielding me from any form of distress. Damien, by contrast, was more introspective, but my love for him was equally profound. A mother, I once believed, never plays favourites. On Sundays, following our church service, our entire family would convene around the grand oak table, a piece meticulously carved by Henry himself. Richard would enthusiastically detail his aspirations of studying engineering, while Damien would remain reticent, merely toying with his meal. Our existence was simple yet beautiful. In the evenings, Henry and I would stroll along the pathways, winding through our small town, discussing our dreams, envisioning our grandchildren's growth, and anticipating our shared twilight years in our beloved home. I never fathomed those walks were preparation for the one that nearly ended my life. On weekends, I would host gatherings where my sisters, Harriet and Irene, would arrive with their spouses and children. Our home would resonate with joyous laughter, children darting about, women exchanging culinary secrets in the kitchen while the men attended to tasks in the garden. Henry was my perfect counterpart. After 4 decades of marriage, he still presented me with wildflowers, gathered on his commute. He assisted with grading my students' assignments, and I would steady pieces of wood for him as he worked in his shop. We were a true partnership, an indissoluble unit, or so I believed. At night we'd recline on the porch, gazing at the stars, contemplating our future. We spoke of embarking on journeys upon retirement, of experiencing the ocean's vastness for the first time, and of constructing a smaller home once our children established their own families. Yet perfect happiness, as I would later discover, often conceals profound tragedies. When Richard reached the age of 20, a subtle shift occurred within our family dynamic. He began engaging in arguments with Damien over matters I couldn't comprehend. I would overhear their hushed conversations in the hallway, only for them to fall silent upon my appearance. Henry assured me it was merely typical sibling rivalry, a phase that would pass. I clung to his words, desperate to maintain the illusion of our flawless family. One October evening, precisely 25 years ago, Richard failed to return home for dinner. We waited until 11, then midnight, then 1 in the morning. Damien claimed to be in his room studying, yet I detected an unusual apprehension in his eyes whenever I inquired about his brother. Henry, accompanied by our neighbours, ventured out to search for him. They scoured every corner of the town, every familiar trail, every place Richard frequented. At dawn, they discovered his lifeless body at the base of the river gorge. The authorities attributed his demise to an accident, suggesting he likely lost his footing in the darkness. I never questioned this explanation, unable to fathom that the reality was far more horrific. Richard's funeral marked the bleakest day of my existence. I wore my sole black attire, the same garment I had donned at my mother's funeral. Damien exhibited an unnerving composure for someone who had just lost his elder sibling. While I wept until I had no tears left, he remained stoic, his expression now with the knowledge I possess, sending shivers down my spine. Henry remained steadfastly by my side throughout that day, offering support when my legs faltered and murmuring words of solace that I now recognize must have tasted like ash in his mouth. Following Richard's passing, Damien underwent a complete transformation. He became exceedingly solicitous, demonstrably affectionate, as if endeavoring to atone for some transgression. He assisted with household chores, accompanied his father to the workshop, and would bring me comforting items when he perceived my sadness. I attributed this to his coping mechanism, his attempt to fill the void Richard had left. How tragically misguided I was. In reality, he was meticulously constructing a facade to conceal the predator lurking within. The years elapsed and the scar never fully healed, but we adapted to its presence. Damien wedded Melissa, a sweet young woman from the adjacent township, and their union appeared to be one of contentment. They were blessed with 2 delightful children, and I finally felt as though life was granting us a second chance at felicity. Melissa affectionately referred to me as Mom and provided assistance with domestic tasks during their visits. Damien had inherited his father's aptitude for carpentry and had established his own enterprise. Everything seemed to have regained its former perfection. However, now, prostrate at the bottom of this ravine, with fractured ribs and the coppery tang of blood on my tongue, I comprehend that all that supposed happiness was a meticulously crafted deception. The initial indications of a brewing storm surfaced 6 months prior, when Henry and I resolved to update our last will and testament. We had diligently saved throughout our lives. Combining our residence, the land bequeathed to me by my parents, and our bank savings, we possessed nearly $200,000 to distribute among our children and grandchildren. It was Damien who suggested we consult an attorney. Mother, father, he stated, his now sinister-seeming smile gracing his features, you are both approaching 60 years of age. It is prudent to ensure your affairs are in order. Beside him, Melissa would nod, caressing my hand with those very digits that would later thrust me toward my doom. We cherish you both immensely, she added in her gentle voice, and we wish to ensure your well-being. How utterly naive I was to misinterpret those pronouncements as genuine affection. The legal counsel, an elder gentleman named Albert, whom we had known for years, outlined our options. We could establish a trust, allocate the inheritance among Damien's offspring, or draft a conventional will. Damien adamantly advocated for designating himself and Melissa as our sole beneficiaries, asserting they would oversee the equitable distribution to the grandchildren. Furthermore, he reasoned, you will require our support as you age. It is essential for us to have access to resources to provide for you adequately. There was an undertone to his words that unsettled me, yet Henry appeared persuaded. My husband, always more trusting than I, acquiesced to the proposal with minimal hesitation. Doubts gnawed at me, particularly recalling Richard's consistent pronouncements about assisting us financially in our later years. My elder son harbored aspirations, dreams of caring for us when the time arrived, but Richard was gone and Damien was our sole surviving child. We executed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon. I distinctly recall Melissa wearing an attractive green dress and bestowing a warm embrace upon me after the formalities. Now we are officially united as a family forever, she whispered in my ear. Her words sent a chill through me then, though their significance eluded me. Damien clasped his father's hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. That evening, as I prepared dinner, an pervasive sense of having committed a grave error lingered. The subsequent weeks were marked by a palpable strangeness. Damien and Melissa commenced visiting us with increased frequency. However, their visits bore a distinctly different tenor. They no longer sought merely to share familial moments. Their conversations invariably revolved around suggestions for home improvements, proposed investments, or recommendations for life insurance policies. "Mother," Melissa articulated, her gaze calculating as she surveyed our furnishings, "you should contemplate selling this expansive residence and relocating to a more compact dwelling. We could assist you in finding a comfortable apartment within the town limits." My heart recoiled at the thought. I adored our home. Every nook harbored cherished memories. Each room recounted the narrative of our 4 decades of shared life. The kitchen, where I had prepared countless meals for my family. The workshop, where Henry brought his masterpieces to life. The garden, where our children and grandchildren had frolicked. I could not envision my existence elsewhere. Upon conveying this sentiment, I detected a flicker of vexation in Damien's eyes, a glint that chilled me to the bone. "Mother, your reasoning is becoming irrational," he declared, his tone a departure from any I had ever heard him employ towards me. "This dwelling is far too large for individuals your age. Should you happen to fall on the stairs or encounter any mishap, we would be unable to render timely assistance." Melissa emphatically concurred, adding, "Moreover, the upkeep must be extraordinarily costly. It would be significantly more prudent to divest now, while the real estate market remains robust, and transition to accommodations more befitting your current stage of life." Henry began to entertain their arguments. My husband, ever the pragmatist, started to acknowledge the logic behind their proposals. Yet an underlying disquietude persisted, an intuition that something more sinister lay beneath their insistent pressure. One evening, following another of these strained discussions, I posed a question to Henry. Did he not find it peculiar that Damien had suddenly developed such a keen interest in our financial affairs? "Hilda, he is merely concerned for our welfare," he responded while brushing his teeth. "Perhaps we should seriously consider his recommendations. We are not as spry as we once were." Yet I perceived a shadow of apprehension in my husband's eyes, a nascent doubt he seemed reluctant to confront. I now understand that Henry harbored suspicions, that he had begun to connect disparate fragments of information that had previously eluded me. The situation escalated when Damien proposed that we grant him power of attorney over our finances. "It is merely a precautionary measure," he explained, while Melissa, with practiced ease, prepared tea in our kitchen as though she were its proprietor. "Should either of you experience a health crisis, we can manage your affairs without legal entanglements." His delivery was so nonchalant, so logical, it almost succeeded in persuading me. However, his insistent demeanor stirred a profound unease within me. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, fixated on the ceiling, listening to Henry's steady breathing beside me, desperately attempting to decipher the source of my disquietude. The following day, I resolved to seek counsel from my sister, Harriet. Harriet had always possessed a sharper intellect, a keener ability to discern people's underlying motives. Upon recounting Damien's persistent pressure, she fell silent for a prolonged moment. "Hilda," she finally articulated, "does it not strike you as peculiar that Damien is so eager to exert control over your assets? I mean, he has his own successful business. He is financially sound. Why would he require such extensive dominion over your finances?" Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. She was unequivocally correct. Damien had never evinced any financial difficulties, had never solicited loans, nor displayed any indication of requiring our financial support. That afternoon, when Damien arrived for yet another of his solicitous discussions regarding our future, I resolved to confront him directly. "Son," I began as we settled into the living room, "why is it so paramount for you to wield control over our financial matters? Your father and I remain entirely lucid." His reaction was immediate and telling. His countenance hardened, and for a fleeting instant I glimpsed something in his eyes that evoked a chillingly familiar sensation. Something cold, calculating, and inherently dangerous. "Mother, it is not about control," he retorted, his voice taut with suppressed emotion. "It is about affection, care, and familial obligation." However, the manner in which he uttered the phrase familial obligation conveyed less an expression of endearment and more a thinly veiled threat. Melissa, who had remained a silent observer until this juncture, interjected with her characteristically gentle yet firm tone. "Hilda, we merely desire what is best for you. It is distressing to witness your preoccupation with matters we could effortlessly manage." That night, after their departure, Henry and I engaged in our first serious disagreement in years. He perceived my concerns as paranoia, an unnecessary fabrication of problems. I, however, remained resolute that something was amiss, that our son's behavior had undergone a drastic and disquieting alteration. "Henry," I implored as we stood by the sink, washing dishes, "do you recall how Damien behaved prior to Richard's death? He was different, more detached, more— I struggled to articulate it, but there was an element about him that instilled a sense of unease within me." My husband ceased his task. The plate in his hands held motionless, and fixed his gaze upon me intently. In his eyes I perceived a revelation I had never before witnessed— recognition. "Hilda," he articulated in a voice so low it was barely audible, "there are certain aspects of Richard's passing that I have deliberately withheld from you." My heart began to pound with an almost unbearable intensity, as if threatening to escape my chest. Henry's words struck me with the force of a thunderbolt. "What about Richard's death?" I stammered, my voice trembling. My husband sank heavily into one of the kitchen chairs, positioned at the very table where we had shared countless family meals, where Richard had completed his homework, and where Damien had always remained in his characteristic silence. Henry ran his hands over his face, as if attempting to expunge the tormenting memories that had plagued him for 25 years. "The night Richard died," he commenced, his voice fractured with emotion, "Damien was not in his room studying, as he had claimed. I observed him departing the house around 8 o'clock. Something about his demeanor prompted me to follow. He had been exhibiting peculiar behavior in the preceding days, displaying increased aggression and resentment." My husband paused, his gaze fixed upon his hands as if the terrible truth he had harbored for so long was etched upon them. "I witnessed them arguing near the gorge, Hilda. I heard them exchanging vile epithets." My world began to tilt precariously. "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, a part of me recoiling from the potential answer. Henry looked up, and I saw tears welling in his eyes, tears he had not shed even at our eldest son's funeral. "Regarding the inheritance, Hilda, Damien was consumed by fury because Richard was the elder son, and according to familial customs, he would receive the greater portion of our assets. But there was something more, something pertaining to finances that Richard had discovered." "What money?" I inquired, the ground beneath me seemingly dissolving. Henry exhaled deeply before continuing. "3 days prior to his demise, Richard sought me out in the workshop. He had unearthed evidence that Damien had been systematically misappropriating funds from our joint savings account. Initially it was modest sums, but they escalated to larger amounts. Richard had amassed irrefutable proof. He had been investigating this matter for months." My mind struggled to process the enormity of what I was hearing. My youngest son, the one who had displayed such solicitous care following Richard's death, the one who had so readily assisted and comforted us, had been pilfering from us even before his brother's tragic end. "Why did you never disclose this to me?" I accused Henry, the feeling of betrayal intensifying manifold, because by the time I reached the gorge that night, it was tragically too late. He responded, his voice choked with emotion. "I found Damien standing beside Richard's lifeless form. Our youngest son was trembling, weeping, and repeatedly muttering, 'It was an accident. It was an accident.' He looked at me with those desperate eyes and implored my assistance. 'Dad,' he pleaded, 'Richard stumbled while attempting to strike me. I merely defended myself and he lost his balance.' Tears streamed uncontrollably down my cheeks. 'But you believed him,' I murmured, though I already knew the answer. Henry nodded slowly, his countenance etched with a profound guilt that had evidently burdened him for decades. 'He was my son, Hilda. My youngest son was begging for my help, and Richard was already gone. I could not resurrect one by condemning the other. I convinced myself it was genuinely an accident, that Damien would learn from his mistakes and emerge a better man.' 'And the embezzled funds?' I inquired, compelled to unravel every harrowing detail of this nightmare. Damien vowed to repay every penny incrementally, claiming he had invested the money in a venture that subsequently failed. He swore he would never repeat such a transgression. And I believed him, Hilda. May God forgive me, but I believed him because I desperately needed to believe my son was not a murderer. I rose unsteadily from the table, clutching the wall for support to prevent myself from collapsing. Every tenet I had held regarding my family, about my surviving son, about the past 25 years of my existence, was a fabrication. "Did he ever repay the money?" I asked, though Henry's expression already conveyed the answer. "Never," he replied. In fact, he continued to siphon off small amounts I feigned ignorance of, because to confront him would necessitate admitting I had become an accessory to murder. I became his accomplice, Hilda. Each time I remained silent, each time I pretended not to notice the dwindling balances in our accounts, I was complicit. The horrifying reality began to crystallize in my mind. "That's precisely why he is so intent on controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not out of concern for us. It's because he intends to complete what he initiated 25 years ago." Henry nodded gravely. "And there is something else, Hilda, something I uncovered only a few weeks ago." "What else could there possibly be?" I asked, feeling as though my heart could scarcely endure another revelation. Henry moved to his desk and retrieved a collection of documents he had concealed beneath other papers. "I have been discreetly investigating Damien's financial standing. His carpentry business is not performing as favorably as he leads us to believe. In reality, he is teetering on the brink of insolvency. He owes in excess of $100,000 to various financial institutions and suppliers." The papers trembled in my grasp as I perused the figures. Damien was not the prosperous individual he purported to be. He was a desperate failure, sustained for decades by falsehoods and ill-gotten gains. "Does Melissa possess knowledge of all this?" I inquired, recalling her saccharine smile and affectionate embraces. "I am certain she does, Hilda," Henry replied. "I have observed how she steers their conversations whenever they discuss our finances, how she poses specific inquiries about our savings, the valuation of our home, and our life insurance policies. These are not innocent questions, Hilda. These are the inquiries of someone meticulously calculating the monetary value of our demise." That pronouncement sent an icy dread through my entire being. "Our demise," I echoed in a whisper. It was the first instance I had contemplated the possibility that Damien harbored intentions of inflicting physical harm upon us. Until that moment, I had presumed his objective was merely financial exploitation or deceit. But if he had orchestrated his own brother's death for monetary gain, what would deter him from doing the same to his parents? "Henry," I implored, grasping his hands, "we must report this to the authorities. We must disclose the truth about Richard and what is unfolding now." However, my husband shook his head, his face a mask of utter hopelessness that shattered my heart. "With what evidence, Hilda? I am complicit in concealing a murder. If I come forward now, I too will face imprisonment. Furthermore, who would credit the testimony of a 65-year-old man who has harbored this secret for a quarter of a century?" He was right. So, we are to simply await his decision to murder us, just as he murdered Richard? "We must exercise extreme caution, Hilda," Henry stated, attempting to project an air of confidence that seemed to elude him. "We will devise a strategy to protect ourselves, to gather evidence, to—" But his words were abruptly cut short by the ringing of the telephone. It was Damien. "Hi, Mum," he said, his voice imbued with the same sweetness that now sounded utterly sinister to my ears. "Melissa and I were just discussing it, and we thought it would be wonderful to commemorate your 40th wedding anniversary with something truly special. How about we take you on an excursion to those mountains you've always spoken so fondly of next weekend? We could enjoy a family hike, capture some photographs, and have a truly memorable day together." My blood ran cold. I met Henry's gaze. He had overheard the conversation, and his face mirrored my own terror. "That is a most thoughtful suggestion, dear son," I managed to reply, my voice quivering. "However, allow us some time to deliberate, and we will inform you of our decision tomorrow." After disconnecting the call, Henry and I exchanged a silent glance, acutely aware that we had just received an invitation to our own execution. "The mountains," I murmured. "He intends to lure us to the mountains to perpetrate a fatal act, designed to appear as an accidental occurrence." Henry nodded gravely, a gesture eerily reminiscent of his reaction at the gorge with Richard. That night, sleep was an impossibility. We clung to each other in our bed, our minds racing, formulating a plan for self-preservation against our own son. The ensuing days were a harrowing ordeal of sustained terror and feigned normalcy. Henry and I were compelled to feign normalcy when Damien and Melissa arrived for their visit. We offered smiles as they recounted their recent mountain excursion and nodded along, captivated by their eagerness to spend time with family. Yet internally, a primal fear gripped my every being. I recognized the eyes of my eldest son's killers staring back at me, and now they were plotting the same fate for my husband and me. Melissa appeared that Wednesday afternoon, her arms laden with a shopping bag, and that signature radiant smile, which in that moment felt like the chilling grimace of a fiend. "Hilda, my dear," she greeted me, embracing me with those very arms that would, I feared, soon propel me to my end. "I've gathered some provisions for our mountain adventure. Biscuits, water, fruit, everything we'll need for a delightful picnic." She opened the bag, displaying its contents with the exuberance of a child, but all I could contemplate was how each item could potentially serve to conceal our demise. "And I've brought my new camera," she added, producing a sophisticated digital device. "I want to capture every precious moment of this special occasion. These will be photographs we'll cherish eternally." The sheer irony of her words left me feeling profoundly ill. The only photograph she would likely capture would be of our lifeless forms at the base of some precipice, should anyone ever discover us. Damien materialized behind her, shouldering a pristine hiking pack. "Father," he addressed Henry with an affected enthusiasm, "I've secured all the essential gear for a secure trek. Ropes, harnesses, torches, a comprehensive first aid kit." Each utterance from his lips felt like a cruel taunt. The perverse nature of their intentions, using safety equipment to orchestrate our murders, rendered me lightheaded. Isn't it a touch perilous for individuals our age? I ventured, striving for a casual tone as I desperately sought any pretext to abandon the excursion. Melissa gently caressed my cheek, her touch imbued with a false tenderness that revolted me. That's precisely why we've selected a remarkably straightforward and secure path, she assured me. It's a trek even youngsters can manage. Moreover, Damien and I will be there to ensure your well-being throughout. Yes, they would be there to care for us, until the precise instant they chose to cast us over a cliff. That evening, once they had departed, Henry and I sat in our living room, our bodies trembling, not from any chill, but from the sheer terror we had suppressed for hours. "We cannot go," I declared, grasping his hands. "We simply cannot. We'll devise some plausible excuse." "If we decline," Henry responded, his voice grave, "they will undoubtedly discover an alternative method to eliminate us. Perhaps something that appears more accidental, like a conflagration at our residence or a botched robbery. At least in the mountains we know their intended course of action." His words, though possessing a grim logic, offered no solace. "So what is your proposal?" I inquired, desperate for any solution that might preserve our lives. Henry contemplated for a few minutes before answering. "We will go, but we will be prepared. I intend to conceal my mobile device and activate its recording function to document all proceedings. If we manage to survive, we will possess evidence, and if we do not," his voice faltered, "at least someone will know the truth." On Friday night, we could barely bring ourselves to touch our dinner. We understood it might be our final shared meal in our home, in that very kitchen where we had experienced so many joyful moments as a complete family. Henry meticulously reviewed his testament once more, ensuring that should any misfortune befall us, Damien would not inherit everything without a record of our suspicions. "I have drafted a letter," he confessed, retrieving a sealed envelope from his desk. "It is addressed to your sister Harriet. In it, I detail all that we know regarding Richard's demise and our forebodings about Damien's intentions towards us. I have secured it within our repository for vital documents. Should we not return from this outing, she will at least know where to seek the truth." That night we retired to bed, clinging to each other, whispering assurances of love that might prove to be our final words. "If anything were to happen to me," Henry stated, "I want you to know that these 40 years spent with you have been the most fulfilling of my existence. Despite everything, despite the missteps and the concealed truths, my affection for you surpasses my own life." I wept silently, imprinting the cadence of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the very scent of his skin into my memory. Saturday dawned under a clear sky, a stark contrast to our dire circumstances. Damien arrived early, his whistling a cheerful melody that sent a shiver down my spine. "Good morning, my dears, my little birds," he called from the doorstep. "Are you ready for your grand adventure?" Melissa appeared behind him, her countenance radiant, reminiscent of a bride on her wedding day, though this union was with death itself. During breakfast, which we could scarcely consume, Damien elaborated on our planned itinerary. "It's a breathtaking path," he announced, unfurling a map across the table. "It leads to a vista point offering panoramic views of the entire valley. They say the scenery is simply spectacular." His eyes gleamed with a seemingly infernal excitement. Naturally, the vistas would be spectacular. They would be the last we would ever behold. "The trail presents some precipitous sections," Melissa interjected, as if imparting valuable tourist advice, "but nothing that seasoned trekkers such as yourselves cannot manage." Her remark regarding our purported hiking prowess struck me as a cruel jest. We were two individuals in their 60s who scarcely managed a leisurely stroll through the park on occasion. As we began to load the vehicle, I observed Damien meticulously inspecting his rucksack, ensuring he possessed every item essential to his scheme. I noticed ropes, a small implement for excavation, and an object resembling a signal flare. "And what is that for?" I inquired, gesturing towards the device. "For emergencies," he responded without missing a beat. "Should we become disoriented or encounter any unforeseen difficulties, we can broadcast a distress signal." Of course, they would broadcast a distress signal after our precipitous descent, thereby ensuring our remains would be discovered and confirming a tragic mishap during a family outing. Every element had been meticulously calculated. Every detail had been orchestrated to render our murders appear utterly natural. The drive to the mountains spanned 2 hours, each minute stretching into an eternity. Melissa selected upbeat music and joined in with the singing as if we were embarking on a genuinely enjoyable family excursion. Damien navigated with caution, adhering strictly to all speed restrictions and pausing at every stop sign. He clearly sought to avoid any mishap that might compromise his flawless design. Throughout the journey, Henry discreetly clasped my hand, activating the recording feature on his telephone. Every occurrence from that juncture forward would be preserved. Should we survive, we would possess irrefutable proof. If not, at least the truth would not perish with us. Upon finally reaching the trailhead, my heart hammered with such ferocity I feared it would burst from my chest. The location was picturesque, adorned with towering trees and the soothing murmur of a nearby river. However, for me it had become the stage for my own execution. Damien and Melissa retrieved their backpacks from the vehicle, their faces alight with smiles and jests, as if it were the most joyous day of their lives. "Are you prepared for the adventure?" Damien inquired. And for the first instance in 25 years, I detected that same chilling gleam in his eyes that he had displayed on the night he had taken his brother's life. The initial segment of the trail was relatively manageable, meandering through verdant foliage and moss-laden stones. Melissa forged ahead, perpetually capturing images and offering commentary on the surrounding splendor. "Observe these wildflowers," she exclaimed, pointing towards clusters of vibrant yellow blooms and a strikingly beautiful avian creature. Her performance was flawless, embodying the persona of a devoted daughter-in-law, relishing a special day with her in-laws. Damien trailed behind us, ostensibly to ensure we maintained our pace, yet I could feel his gaze upon our backs, sharp as daggers. Each time I turned to meet his gaze, he would offer that familiar grin, a contortion perfected over 25 years of deception. "How are you both faring, mother and father?" he would inquire with feigned solicitude. "Do you require a pause to rest?" After an hour of traversing the path, we commenced an ascent along a steeper incline. My legs already felt heavy, and Henry was breathing with noticeable effort. We were unaccustomed to such physical exertion, a fact our homicidal progeny were acutely aware of. They had deliberately selected a route designed to incapacitate us physically, rendering us vulnerable when the opportune moment arrived to enact their scheme. "We are nearly at the lookout point," Melissa announced. Despite the map I had consulted at home indicating at least another hour of hiking remained, her fabrication confirmed their lack of intention to reach the actual lookout. The place designated for our demise must be considerably closer. Throughout our trek, I endeavored to commit every detail of the path to memory, each tree, each boulder, that might serve as a reference point should I miraculously survive and be required to recount the exact location of events to the authorities. Henry likewise was engaged in the same undertaking, and we exchanged furtive glances, laden with a mixture of terror and resolve. We understood we were proceeding towards our end, Yet we also recognized this was our sole prospect of securing evidence against our murderers. "Oh, look at that!" Melissa suddenly exclaimed, directing her attention to a formation of rocks looming to our right. "That cliff offers an astonishing panorama. Why don't we ascend to capture some truly exceptional photographs?" A wave of icy dread washed over me. There it was, the precise location they had designated for our assassination. The cliff face soared approximately 90 feet above the main trail, accessible via a secondary path that appeared significantly more hazardous than the one we had been following. The rocks were unstable. Fewer trees were available to grasp for support in the event of a misstep. And from the summit, a sheer drop into a deep chasm filled with jagged rocks was visible. "I am uncertain if that is a prudent course of action," I stated, attempting to maintain an appearance of nonchalance. "That path seems rather challenging for individuals our age." However, Damien had already begun traversing towards the turnoff, his backpack laden with the safety equipment I knew he had no intention of employing to rescue us. "Come along, Mother," he coaxed, employing that tone he used as a child when seeking to persuade me of something. "It will only require a few moments. Besides, Melissa is correct. The photographs from up there will be absolutely spectacular." The inflection he used when uttering spectacular sent a tremor through me. They would indeed be spectacular, though for the viewers as evidence of our unfortunate demise. Henry subtly squeezed my hand, a reminder that his device was diligently recording everything. We had no alternative but to proceed. We had to reach the precipice to obtain the necessary evidence. If we resisted now, they would simply find another occasion, another location, another pretext to end our lives. The ascent to the cliff was grueling. Loose scree shifted beneath our feet, and on more than one occasion I teetered on the brink of falling. Yet the most chilling realization was how perfectly suited this place was for a murder. If one were to accidentally stumble and plunge from the edge, survival would be an impossibility. And, crucially, there would be no witnesses. "We are nearly there," Melissa's voice echoed from above, where she had already arrived with the practiced ease of someone who had meticulously scouted this route. Damien followed her and then assisted Henry and me in navigating the final few feet of the climb. His hands gripping my arms felt akin to the talons of a vulture. The vista point was, in truth, spectacular. From its vantage, the entire valley unfolded, distant mountains pierced the horizon, and the river meandered through the trees below. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a moment of profound beauty to share with family. But burdened by my foreknowledge, the setting felt like the perfect tableau for a waking nightmare. "Come closer for the photographs," Melissa beckoned, positioning herself near the cliff's edge. "I want the valley as the backdrop." Henry and I advanced slowly, each step drawing us nearer to our ultimate destination. I could discern Damien strategically positioning himself behind us, meticulously calculating angles and measuring distances. "Perfect," Melissa chirped, raising her camera. "Now embrace each other and smile." Henry and I clasped each other, perhaps for the final time, as she proceeded to capture image after image. Each flash of the camera felt like a thunderclap, announcing the imminent tempest. "Let's take one more," Damien suggested, moving closer to us. "But this time, stand a little further back so the landscape appears more prominent." A single step backward placed us precisely at the precipice's brink. Henry and I exchanged a significant look. The moment had arrived. We retreated as instructed, feeling the solid earth vanish beneath our feet, leaving only the vast emptiness of the abyss behind us. Melissa raised the camera once more, but this time I perceived a distinct shift in her gaze. The pretense was no longer necessary. The mask had slipped. "Smile," she commanded, her voice devoid of its earlier sweetness. "This will be your final photograph." At that instant, Damien lunged towards us, his arms extended. The plan was brutally simple: propel us backward over the edge, capture photographic evidence of the accident, and then descend to locate our shattered forms. But Henry had been preparing for this precise juncture. In the nick of time, he managed to seize Damien's wrist and yank him forward. "If we are to perish," he roared, his voice imbued with a ferocity I had never witnessed, "you are coming with us." For a fleeting moment, all four of us teetered on the cliff's edge, locked in a macabre dance between life and death. Melissa shrieked and attempted to aid Damien, but the collective weight was overwhelming. I felt the ground crumble beneath me, felt the inexorable pull of gravity begin to assert its dominion. And then the four of us plunged together, entwined in a fatal embrace, our screams mingling with the whistling wind as the rocky terrain rushed up at us with terrifying speed. In those agonizing seconds that stretched into an eternity, my thoughts turned to Richard, and how he must have felt as Damien shoved him into the gorge 25 years prior. The impact was cataclysmic. I heard the horrifying crack of bones, the sound of my own body disintegrating against the unforgiving rocks. The pain was beyond comprehension, yet more harrowing still was the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, and the chilling certainty that this time Damien had triumphed. This time there would be no witnesses to attest to the truth. But then I heard Henry's voice, faint but distinct. "Hilda, do not move. Play dead." And I grasped something astonishing. I was still alive. The agony was so acute I believed I would succumb to madness. Every sinew of my being screamed in torment. I felt blood coursing down my face and a damp, sticky sensation saturating my clothing. But Henry's words resonated in my ears like a divine commandment. Play dead. Mustering a reserve of willpower I never knew I possessed, I remained utterly motionless, even controlling my respiration to the point of imperceptibility. A few yards away, I could discern the pained groans of Damien and Melissa. They too had survived the fall, but their moans suggested they were in a more critical state than we. "Melissa," I heard my son's broken utterance, "are you unharmed?" His concern for his wife sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. This man, who had murdered his own brother and attempted to dispatch us, was still capable of feeling affection for another. "I believe my leg is fractured," Melissa moaned. "It aches terribly." "And the elderly couple?" Damien inquired. The disrespectful manner in which she referred to us confirmed my long-held suspicion. We had never truly been family to her. We were merely impediments to her pursuit of our wealth. I heard movement as if Damien were attempting to crawl towards us. My heart thudded with such vehemence I feared he would detect it. "They are deceased," he declared after several minutes that felt like hours. "Both have their eyes open, but they are not breathing." His fabrication ignited a strange ember of hope within me. If he believed us gone, perhaps a chance for survival remained. "Excellent," Melissa whispered, her voice laced with a satisfaction that chilled me to the bone. It transpired precisely as we envisioned. Well, apart from our own descent, of course. I detected the bitterness in her laughter. "At least we shall no longer need to feign affection for them." For the ensuing few minutes, which seemed to stretch into an eternity, Damien and Melissa discussed their predicament. Both were injured, yet capable of movement. Their revised plan was to crawl until they located a point from which they could summon assistance, and then recount a fabricated tale of their miraculous survival from a tragic accident that had claimed their beloved grandparents. "Remember the narrative," Damien instructed Melissa. "We were taking photographs when a rock dislodged beneath Father's feet. He stumbled, and in attempting to steady himself, he pulled Mother with him. We tried to intervene, but we fell as well. It is imperative that our accounts are consistent. I am aware, Melissa replied. We have rehearsed this scenario countless times. We are the traumatized survivors of a familial tragedy. Poor us. We have lost our cherished in-laws in a dreadful mishap. Her portrayal was so utterly convincing that had I not been privy to the actual events, I would have readily accepted every word. Gradually, their voices receded as they crawled towards what they hoped would be their salvation. When silence finally descended, Henry whispered my name so softly I could barely discern it. Hilda, are you all right? I responded in a similar hushed tone, confirming my survival, though gravely injured. My left leg is broken, he informed me, his voice choked with pain, and I suspect I have several fractured ribs. And yourself? I conducted a mental assessment of my own physical state. A sharp pain radiated from my right arm. My head throbbed as if subjected to repeated blows, and there was undeniably something amiss with my shoulder, but I was alive, and that was more than I had dared to hope for. We are badly hurt, but we are alive, I whispered. It works, but there is no signal down here. That was the most terrifying aspect of our predicament. We were alive, yet trapped at the bottom of a gorge, wounded and utterly cut off from the outside world. If no one came searching for us, we would slowly succumb to thirst, starvation, or our injuries. Henry, I implored, before it is too late, you must tell me everything. Everything that transpired that night. Richard perished. My husband exhaled deeply, as if he had been anticipating this confession for a quarter of a century. That evening, he began, his voice trembling, Richard sought me out in the workshop. He was incandescent with rage. He held documents in his hands, bank statements. He presented me with evidence that Damien had been systematically embezzling funds from our accounts for months. Initially, it was small sums, escalating to larger amounts. Richard had initiated an investigation because he had noticed irregularities in our savings. The physical agony merged with emotional anguish as I absorbed the truth that had been concealed for decades. Richard intended to confront Damien that very night, Henry continued. I attempted to placate him, to persuade him to defer until the following day, but he was resolute. He declared he could not rest, knowing his younger brother was pilfering from us. And you followed him? I asked, although I already surmised the answer. I followed him because I was apprehensive about the potential repercussions. I was aware of Richard's temper when provoked, and furthermore I had begun to perceive something unsettling about Damien's recent demeanour, a certain coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. Upon reaching the gorge, Henry proceeded, I discovered them engaged in a heated altercation. Richard brandished the documents, waving them directly in Damien's face. You are a thief, he bellowed. You are stealing from our own parents. Damien vehemently denied everything, asserting Richard was delusional and fabricating the accusations. My heart pounded as I envisioned the scene, my two sons confronting each other in the darkness, one vehemently accusing the other of profound betrayal. What happened next? Henry paused for an extended period before continuing. Richard informed him that if he did not return the funds and confess everything to us, he would reveal the truth himself. Damien became utterly unhinged. He shrieked that Richard had always been the favoured one, that life had always been easy for him, and that it was time for a reversal of fortunes. And then, Henry's voice cracked. Damien pushed Richard. It was not an accident. He shoved him with all his might, deliberately. I witnessed Richard struggling to maintain his footing. I saw his arms flailing desperately, reaching for anything to grasp. But it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mingling with the blood from my wounds. Why did you never reveal the truth to me? Henry sighed profoundly, because when I reached Damien's location, he was weeping, trembling, repeatedly stating that it had been an accident, that he had not intended it. He implored me not to disclose anything, stating he couldn't bear to lose you as well. Yet you recognized it was a fabrication, I whispered from the depths of my being. Indeed, but he was my son, Hilda, my sole remaining son. How could I possibly hand him over to the authorities? How could I dismantle what little remained of our family? His rationalization inflicted pain as severe as my physical wounds. And the pilfered funds, I pressed on. Damien vowed to reimburse me gradually. He swore it was an impulsive act born of desperation, a lapse that would never recur. However, not a single cent was ever returned. Worse still, his thievery continued and I remained silent, becoming increasingly complicit with each passing day. Just then, distant voices reached us. Damien and Melissa had evidently found assistance. Rescue squads would soon arrive, and our murderous offspring would then perform their ultimate charade, the tragedy. The voices intensified, accompanied by the thrum of helicopters overhead. The rescue party had arrived, bringing with them the most critical juncture of our existence. Henry and I had mere minutes to decide. Should we maintain our pretense of being deceased until a suitable moment arose to reveal the truth? Or should we risk being discovered alongside our killers? Hilda, Henry breathed urgently. The phone captured every event unfolding above. We possess Melissa's admission of their scheme. We have Damien's acknowledgement that we were impediments. We have it all. However, if they discover us alive now, they can obliterate the evidence before we can present it to the authorities. He was correct. If Damien and Melissa realized we had survived and overheard their confessions, they would find a way to silence us permanently. This time, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be far more direct and conclusive. We had to await the opportune moment. "They're down here," Damien's voice boomed from above. "My parents, please hurry." His performance was flawless, his voice thick with anguish and despair. Had I not known the truth, I would have believed him a son utterly shattered by the loss of his parents. "Sir, remain composed," a commanding voice responded, presumably belonging to the leader of the rescue team. "We will descend to assess the situation. You and your wife may move." I heard the clinking of ropes and equipment being readied for their descent. Melissa had perfected her role as the distraught widow. "I cannot fathom that this has transpired," she sobbed. "We were capturing joyous photographs. It all happened so swiftly. A rock dislodged and they plunged." Every utterance pierced my heart, knowing she would relay the identical narrative to the police, the media, anyone receptive to her version of events. The rescuers commenced their descent. I could hear their voices drawing nearer, the scuff of their boots on the rock, the jingle of their gear. Henry discreetly squeezed my hand, a reminder to sustain our charade regardless of the circumstances. "They're here!" one of the rescuers exclaimed upon finding us. "We have 2 individuals at the gorge's bottom." He approached and began his examination. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing so faint it was virtually undetectable. I felt his hands searching for a pulse on my neck, his ear close to my mouth, attempting to discern respiration. "This one still possesses a faint pulse," he declared, referring to Henry. "The woman? I am uncertain. I require the medical team down here immediately." My heart pounded. The plan was succeeding. They would believe Henry was teetering on death's door, yet still alive, while I would be so near to demise as to pose no immediate threat. For the subsequent few minutes, which felt like hours, paramedics attended to us. I felt them place an oxygen mask on me, tend to my injuries, and secure me to a stretcher. Throughout this ordeal, I had to battle every instinct urging me to open my eyes, to plead for assistance, to cease the pretense. The male is stable, though critical, I overheard one of the paramedics report over the radio. The woman is in extremely grave condition. Pulse is barely perceptible. We must transport them to the hospital without delay. Perfect. They would convey us to the hospital, affording us the opportunity to communicate with the authorities without Damien and Melissa being able to silence us. During our ascent on the stretchers, I could discern Melissa's subdued sobs and the words of solace the rescuers offered her and Damien. "You were remarkably brave to endure this," someone remarked to her. "It's a miracle you are relatively unharmed." If only they knew the true miracle was that Henry and I were alive to recount the truth. In the medical helicopter, as we journeyed toward the hospital, I sensed Henry's presence on the stretcher adjacent to mine. The paramedics were focused on maintaining his stability, and from their discourse I gathered his condition was critical. His injuries were more severe than mine, and for a terrifying instant I feared he might perish before we could divulge the truth. "Ma'am," I heard one of the paramedics say to me, "if you can hear me, hold on. We will be at the hospital in a few minutes." His voice was gentle, imbued with a genuine compassion, starkly contrasting with the falsehoods I had been hearing from my own kin. Upon our arrival at the hospital, pandemonium ensued immediately. Doctors and nurses rushed to and fro, issuing medical directives I couldn't comprehend. I was taken directly to an emergency room where they commenced treatment for my injuries. I had to maintain the pretense of unconsciousness, but I also needed to devise a method to communicate with someone trustworthy. Doctor," I heard a nurse remark, "her vital signs are unusual. Her pulse is stronger than we would anticipate for someone in her supposed condition." My heart leaped. They had discovered me. I was such a poor actress that my own body was betraying me. The doctor murmured. "It occurs sometimes in cases of extreme trauma. The body possesses mysterious ways of clinging to life. Let's observe closely. The lady, well, the next few hours will be critical. We've done all we can." Melissa emitted a sound that was presumably a sob of sorrow, but to me it resembled a sigh of relief. "May we see them?" Damien inquired. "Just for a few moments. We need to say goodbye just in case." The doctor consented. And soon I heard footsteps approaching my bed. It was the most perilous moment of all. I had to convince my murderous son that I was truly dying. I felt Damien's proximity by my bedside. His hand brushed mine, and it was all I could do not to recoil. "Mom," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I am so sorry this has happened." His words were poisoned honey, sweet on the surface, yet lethal in their essence. Melissa moved closer from the other side. "Hilda, my dear," she murmured, "you have been like a mother to me. We will never forget you." Liar. The only reason they wouldn't forget me was because they would have to live with the knowledge that they had ended my life. But then Damien leaned closer to my ear and whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. "I hope you have learned your lesson, Mum. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are best left buried, much like Richard." At that instant I knew our plan had been successful. Damien had just confessed, and although I lacked the means to record it, a nurse in the room had heard every word. Damien's whisper echoed in my ears like a direct admission of his guilt. He had mentioned Richard. He had conceded that certain truths ought to remain concealed. And most crucially, he had acknowledged that our inquiries into financial matters were the impetus for our incident. But I required more. I needed a full confession that could not be misconstrued or repudiated later. The nurse who had overheard the remark, a young woman named Innes, according to her identification badge, had frozen near the monitoring equipment. Through my partially closed eyelids, I observed her eyes widen in astonishment and dread. She had overheard something she ought not to have, and her expression conveyed that she fully grasped the implications of those words. "What did you say about Richard?" Melissa whispered, clearly surprised by the mention of their deceased sibling. Damien stiffened, realizing he had overstepped. "Nothing," he muttered. "I just meant... Well, Mum always wondered what truly happened that night. I suppose it doesn't matter anymore." But it did matter, and Melissa, astute as she was, perceived that her husband had erred. "Damien," she said, her voice taut, "let's go. The doctors require space to work." I could sense the tension between them, the unspoken understanding that they had spoken too much in the wrong place. After they departed, the nurse approached my bedside. "Ma'am," she whispered so softly I could barely discern her words. "I know you can hear me. What I just overheard is not normal. If you are in danger, you need to indicate it somehow." Her voice carried an urgency that filled me with hope. Someone else had begun to suspect. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. It was the slightest possible motion, yet Inns noticed it immediately. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, "she is feigning unconsciousness." I moved my finger again, this time twice. "Yes, listen," she said, leaning even closer. "I will pretend to check your monitors. If you are in danger from those individuals who are just here, move your finger 3 times." Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Inns gasped. "They did this to you." 3 more movements. The nurse stepped away from my bed and pretended to examine my IV line, all the while processing her revelation. I could see in her expression that she was grappling with the decision of her next course of action. Finally, she approached me once more. "I am going to speak with the doctor in charge," she whispered. "But I need you to continue your pretense until we can ensure your safety. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. The subsequent minutes were agonizing. Inns exited the room, leaving me alone, waiting and praying that she would believe my account and take the appropriate measures. Eventually, I heard approaching footsteps. It was Inns, accompanied by an older gentleman who must have been the chief physician, and surprisingly, 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor said in a low tone, "Nurse Inns has informed me of your situation. If you can hear me, we need you to know that you are now secure. The officers are here to protect you." A wave of relief so intense it nearly shattered my composure washed over me. "Can you open your eyes?" one of the officers inquired. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The hospital light momentarily blinded me, but I gradually managed to focus on the concerned faces surrounding me. "Thank goodness," Inns murmured. "I thought I was losing my mind." "Ma'am," said the police officer, a middle-aged man with a serious countenance, "I am Detective Johnson. We understand you may be in a very perilous situation. Can you recount to us what truly transpired on that mountain?" My voice emerged as a hoarse whisper after hours of simulating unconsciousness. "My son," I rasped. "My son and his wife pushed us." The ensuing hours were a blur of statements, recordings, and revelations. I recounted to Detective Johnson every detail I knew. Richard's demise, Damien's pilfering, the pressure to alter our will, and finally the scheme to murder us on the mountain. But the most crucial element was the recording on Henry's phone. "Your husband recorded evidence?" the detective asked, his eyes gleaming. "Yes," I affirmed. "It is all on his phone. The confessions, the plans, everything." The detective immediately proceeded to the room where Henry was receiving treatment. Henry had regained consciousness an hour after me, and upon the detective's explanation of the circumstances, he handed over his phone without hesitation. "Here is everything," he stated in a weak yet firm voice. 2 years of deception and the truth about what occurred today. While police technicians analysed the recording, Damien and Melissa remained in the waiting area, continuing their pretense as devastated family members to other hospital visitors. They were oblivious to the fact that their carefully crafted performance was about to conclude permanently. "The recording is clear," the detective announced after an hour. "We have explicit confessions regarding Richard's murder, admissions of financial embezzlement, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder against both of you. It is more than sufficient for their apprehension." "But will you apprehend them here?" I inquired, concerned for our safety. "If they realize we are alive and speaking," the detective nodded, acknowledging my apprehension. "We already have officers in position. As soon as we secure the arrest warrant, we will detain them. In the interim, you are both under police protection." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Damien and Melissa were downstairs, likely conversing with relatives of other patients, receiving condolences for our supposed deaths, and planning the arrangements for our funeral and inheritance. They had no inkling that upstairs, in the hospital rooms, we were dismantling their meticulously constructed edifice of lies. "Is there anything else?" the detective inquired, producing a folder of documents. "After hearing your account, we investigated your son's financial records. Not only is he bankrupt, as you suspected, but he also owes money to some highly dangerous individuals, unofficial lenders who do not accept excuses." My blood ran cold. "You mean we were not merely an inconvenience to him?" "He confirmed it," the detective stated. "He considered you his only salvation. With your inheritance, he could settle his debts and start anew. Without you, he would likely be deceased within a few weeks." That revelation added a new layer to the betrayal. He hadn't simply viewed us as obstacles. He had seen us as his financial lifeline. Our deaths were not merely convenient for him, they were absolutely essential for his survival. "And what will become of our grandchildren?" I asked, a fresh wave of sorrow washing over me at the thought of Damien and Melissa's innocent children. "Social services will assume temporary custody of them," the detective replied gently. "However, as I understand it, you could petition for custody once you have recovered from your injuries." The notion of raising the children of our murderers was overwhelming, yet it was also the sole means of ensuring something positive emerged from this nightmare. Those children were blameless and deserved a chance to grow up in a household where love was genuine, not feigned. "It is time," the detective announced as an officer entered the room bearing papers. "The warrants have been signed. We will apprehend them now." Through the hospital room window overlooking the parking lot, I observed police officers discreetly taking their positions. The moment I had anticipated for 25 years had finally arrived. "Damien Black and Melissa Black," I heard the firm voice of the officer in charge. "You are under arrest for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Hilda and Henry Black." The ensuing silence was deafening. Then Melissa's hysterical cry. "What are you talking about? We are the victims here. Our in-laws perished in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "your in-laws are alive and they have provided complete evidence of your transgressions." A moment of absolute quiet followed, then a desperate shriek from Damien. "That is impossible. We saw them perish. They were deceased." His involuntary confession was captured by the police recorders, adding another piece of evidence to their case. Via the radio, I heard Melissa begin to cast blame upon Damien. "It was all his idea. I did not wish to do any of this. He forced me." And Damien, in his desperation, screamed, "You were the one who suggested the cliff. You orchestrated all of this." Within minutes, the alliance that had endured for years crumbled as each attempted to salvage their own skin. Detective Johnson returned to my room an hour later. his expression a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. "They have been arrested and are en route to the station," he informed me. "They are both attempting to blame each other, which only strengthens our case. However, there is something else I need to convey to you." "What else?" I asked, though I doubted my heart could withstand further revelations. "During the arrest, we discovered this in your son's backpack," he said, displaying a small digital recorder. "Apparently, he had been recording his conversations with you and your husband for the past few weeks, likely seeking evidence that you suspected something." My blood ran cold. "What does that imply?" The detective sighed. "It signifies that he was aware you were beginning to uncover the truth. The excursion to the mountain was not a spontaneous decision. It was a direct response to your suspicions. In one of the recordings, you can clearly hear Melissa telling him, 'We must act swiftly before they approach the police.' The sheer depth of the planning and the cold calculation took my breath away. They had not merely plotted our demise, they had been monitoring our conversations, assessing the level of threat we posed to them. We were mice in a laboratory, and they were the scientists observing our every move." "There is something else," the detective continued, "that we uncovered during the investigation of his finances. Your son not only owed money to dangerous lenders, but he had also forged your signature on several documents in an attempt to access your bank accounts. My own son had not only planned to murder me, he had been actively defrauding me, counterfeiting my signature, and violating every tenet of familial trust I had strived to instill in him." "How much money did he steal in total?" I inquired, though I was uncertain if I wished to know. "Approximately $50,000 over the last 5 years," the detective replied. "Small amounts that he believed you would not notice, but which, when aggregated, constitute a significant sum. The wealth Henry and I had painstakingly accumulated over decades of diligent labor, penny by penny, had been subsidizing our son's life of extravagance while he plotted our murder. The subsequent days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, legal consultations, and calls from news outlets that had seized upon the story. The local press had dubbed the case the most abhorrent family betrayal of the decade, and reporters from across the nation were eager to hear our account of the events. My sister Harriet arrived from the neighboring town, weeping and embracing me as if she hadn't seen me in years. Hilda," she repeated, "I always sensed something was amiss with Damien after Richard's death, but I never imagined he was capable of this." Her words offered a measure of comfort, confirming that my maternal instincts had not been entirely misguided. "And the children?" I asked, referring to my grandchildren now under the temporary care of social services. "I saw them yesterday," Harriet replied sadly. "They are confused, asking why their parents cannot come home. They are too young to comprehend what truly transpired." The attorney we had retained, the same Albert who had drafted our will, visited us with news regarding the legal proceedings. "The case is robust," he assured us. "With the recordings, the confessions during the arrest, and all the financial evidence, it is virtually impossible for them to evade significant convictions." However, he then added something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Nevertheless, they are attempting to negotiate a plea for a lesser offense by claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated." "A crime of passion?" I exclaimed indignantly. "They planned this for weeks, acquired specialized equipment, and selected the ideal location." Albert nodded gravely. "I am aware, and we possess evidence of premeditation, but their legal counsel will argue it was a desperate act, driven by extreme financial duress. The prospect that they might receive reduced sentences for their heinous deeds filled me with rage. They had murdered Richard. They had attempted to end our lives. For years our funds had been plundered, and now, They sought to portray themselves as mere victims of unfortunate circumstances. What measures can we take to ensure they face the consequences they deserve? I inquired. Bear witness, Albert responded concisely. Your account, coupled with the totality of the evidence, will be paramount in enabling the jury to comprehend the true character of these transgressions. However, I must caution you, confronting your son in court will be an emotionally arduous experience. He was correct. The prospect of meeting Damien's gaze throughout the proceedings, of enduring his defense attorney's attempts to legitimize the inexcusable, of reliving every agonizing moment of this ordeal in public, felt utterly crushing. Yet it was a duty I owed to Richard, to ourselves, and to my grandchildren, who rightfully deserved to know the unvarnished truth about their parents. 3 weeks after their apprehension, Henry and I were finally permitted to return to our abode. Our injuries had sufficiently mended to allow for mobility, though he still required crutches, and my arm remained immobilized in a sling. The house felt profoundly unfamiliar, akin to the deserted stage of a theatrical production once the cast has departed. Everything remained precisely as we had left it on the day of our ill-fated family excursion. The breakfast remnants lingered in the sink. The bed remained unmade. The blossoms Damien had presented to me earlier that week, now deceased, lay on the kitchen counter. It was as though time itself had frozen at the instant our ordinary existence irrevocably ceased. Do you believe we will ever find happiness again? I posed to Henry that inaugural evening back, as we settled into our accustomed bed. He enfolded me with his uninjured arm and exhaled a profound sigh. I cannot say, Hilda, he admitted, but we are alive. The truth is on our side, and for the first time in 25 years, we are liberated from the burden of concealment. The trial commenced 6 months hence. On the day designated for my testimony, I met Damien's gaze directly for the initial time since his arrest. I perceived no hint of regret, no flicker of suffering. I did not recognize the son I had nurtured. Instead, I saw a detached and calculating stranger who had masqueraded as my offspring for a quarter century. Upon concluding my testimony, after recounting every horrific facet of our ordeal, I addressed him directly from the witness stand. Damien, I no longer recognize you, nor can you be considered my son. My son perished the night you ended Richard's life, and for 25 years, what has inhabited his form is a monstrous entity I unwittingly helped to cultivate. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a verdict of guilty for Damien on charges of first-degree murder in Richard's demise and first-degree attempted murder for his actions against us. Melissa was convicted on the same charges as an accessory. Both were handed sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Now, 1 year onward, Henry and I have initiated the formal process of adopting our grandchildren. They are exquisite and innocent beings who deserve the opportunity to experience genuine affection, not the manipulative and toxic bond they received from their biological parents. Each evening as I tuck them into bed, I share stories of their Uncle Richard, the brother they never had the chance to know. I speak of his inherent goodness, his unwavering integrity, and his aspirations.